Alice Brown, and I'm here to discuss the history of Nigeria's geography, trade, art, natural resources, religion, and boundaries. Nigeria, affectionately referred to as the Giant of Africa, is a vast land. It has an area of 356,669 square miles. Its longitude is 10 degrees north and latitude is 8 degrees east. Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa. There are more than 250 ethnic groups, with the Hausa, Fulani, Yoruba, and Igbo being the dominant groups. There are more than 186 million people occupying Nigeria. Nigeria is home to many river systems, but the Niger Delta is one of the world's largest. Its presence had a profound effect on Nigeria's history. Nigeria was colonized by the British, and by 1870, the trade routes on the River Niger were so lucrative that a British man by the name of George Dashwood Goldie created the Royal Niger Company to keep control of the river away from French competitors. Later, the British government gained control of the Royal Niger Company's territories. These territories were renamed to the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria and the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria until January 1st, 1914, when the protectorates combined to become the Colony and Protectorate of Nigeria. Another part of Nigeria's geography that had a profound effect on its history is its coastline, sometimes referred to as the Slave Coast. For example, the town of Badagry was an important slave route in Nigeria. Slaves were transported from places such as Benin, Togo, and the interior of Nigeria. Badagry exported at least 550,000 Africans from the early 1500s. Early slave export to Nigeria took place among the Benin people with the Portuguese. The Portuguese arrived in Nigeria in 1470 and traded guns with the Benin people in exchange for spices, shells, slaves, and spirits. This relationship lasted until the Benin people stopped selling slaves and the Portuguese started to buy spices in the region of the Indian Ocean because they had more variety. This video below shows a little bit of the history of slavery in Nigeria.
Also, IRONMUZZLE. It has a padlock at the back of the head attached to the chain around the slave's neck. But to the chiefs, to the African chiefs and the European, this was too expensive to make. It wasn't as if it was expensive, but they don't want to go to the blacksmiths and spend money on slaves. So to them, the cheapest type of mouth lock was the type that they pierce the slaves' upper and lower lips, and they put padlock on their mouth and they lock them up, like you lock your bedroom or your safe. Okay. Now, why do they lock the mouth of slaves? They have three reasons why they locked the mouth of slaves. The first reason was because out of 24 hours, slaves work for 18 hours. They believe if they allow slaves to communicate or talk, they waste time. But they want them to concentrate on their work on the farm, so to prevent them from communicating so that they can concentrate on their work. That was the main or major reason why they locked the mouth of slaves. The second reason was because slaves were not treated well. So they were afraid that if they allow slaves to talk or communicate, they can plan among themselves, they can spread information, they can decide to revolt or rebel or fight back. But they don't want them to fight back, they don't want them to revolt, they don't want them to spread information among themselves. That's the number two reason why they locked their mouths. The third reason was to prevent them from eating any of the farm products, like the sugarcane, the banana, or drink the orange, or eat the corn, despite the fact that those farm products were planted by the slaves themselves. This is a picture of a slave that is being tortured. When they beat or torture a slave, they make sure other slaves are there to watch. The main reason why they do that is to put fear in their heart. And there are times that slaves are being beaten or tortured to death, like the ones on the floor. Now, when a slave is being beaten to death or tortured to death, what do they do with the body? What do they do with the corpse? They bury the body on the plantation and use such a body as manure or fertilizer. Now, the question is this: if you were born during the Roman Empire as a white man, that means you can also become a slave. The black man can buy you as a slave. Or if you were born in Israel at that time, Israelites were like whites and they were slaves in Egypt. Yeah. Or you're a black man here in Africa. If you were born that time, would you man, sir, would you have preferred to be a slave or a slave trader? Like in the case of this man, he's a chief. He's an African chief. Now, these are slave raiders. They've already captured his people. Now they're in the chief's house. But the chief, rather than being captured as a slave, he got a knife in his hand. He decided to kill himself. Would you
Gaddafi should do this. Gaddafi should do this.
We're in the Brooklyn Museum looking at a life-size male head.
This is one of the oldest terracottas from sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, it's about 2,500 years old.
It's from a part of Africa that we now call Nigeria, and this is one of numerous life-size human figures that have been found.
We've found heads, we've found bodies positioned in standing or seated or prayer positions, and we've also found animals from this region. They're called Nok terracottas, and Nok really just refers to a small village where the very first one was found. But since then, we've found quite a few in present-day Nigeria.
These have been found by farmers, people tilling fields, and as a result, many of the objects come without a careful scientific archaeological method that would give us more information about the objects themselves.
And in fact, we don't even have a name of a culture that made them. They're so old. But what we do know is that originally they were fired with a slip and they were smooth in texture.
They're terracotta and they're hollow, and they would have originally had color applied to them. And what slip really is are very small fragments of clay, often with iron oxide that's mixed in, that can become a black or a red depending on how it's fired.
They were either built up through a coiling technique, or maybe it was a block of clay that was then hollowed out, which suggests a subtractive technique.
Well, there's no question that there's some subtractive work here, because we can see it incising into the surface, and we can see it scraping away, creating these beautiful, highly refined geometric forms for the face.
And most of the objects that we've found are very stylized and similar in that they all have this triangular shaped eye with a perforated pupil, these arched brows.
One of the most distinctive features of this head is the hair. Wonderful mounds, these craters around the back of the head.
If you look closely in the back, you can actually see lines suggest the parting of the hair, and striation, which even suggests the combing process.
It's important to remember when we're looking at an object like this that we're not seeing it in its original context, the way it was used, the kind of environment it would have been in, and of course its original colors and whether or not there would have been anything added. When I see, for example, the perforations of the eyes which go all the way into the hollow of the clay object itself, my instinct is to imagine that that was filled with something, but we don't know.
And then if we also look at the mouth is slightly open. It suggests maybe speech, that the figure has something to tell us.
It's so animated. This is a figure that seems to be in the midst of a conversation. This is an object that was made at the same time that ancient Greece and Rome were in power, that ancient Egypt was still functioning, and yet here we are in sub-Saharan Africa. Clearly evidence of a very sophisticated culture.
It suggests that there was a art-making tradition in West Africa that is as ancient as Egypt, and that these artists were concerned with representation of the human form. We don't have an example of the body that this went with, but we know that the bodies generally were smaller in scale than the head, so it suggests that the head was the most significant part. And we find that tradition of the head as the center, the seat of wisdom, in other cultures throughout West Africa, in this same region today.
There's a subtlety to the abstraction of the face that I find really compelling. Look, for example, at the way that the eyes, which are straight across at the top and then dip down, creates a sense of quietness in the figure and a sense of seriousness, a sense of gravity in the figure, but then is perfectly echoed in the area above the eye, between the top lid and the eyebrow.
It suggests an inner calm or an inner serenity that may tell us something more about the figure than just their surface depiction. It may suggest something about an inner thought or an inner morality that the artist was trying to convey.
Between 500 BC and 200 AD, the Nok civilization of northern Nigeria were credited for producing highly stylized, life-size terracotta figures. These figures were found by accident while surface mining for alluvial tin deposits, farming, and doing various other digging. These figures were believed to serve as ancestral portraits, grave markers, charms for various traditional practices, and roof structures in ancient Nigeria. The video here gives an in-depth overview of their stylization and history. Nigeria boasts oil, natural gas, talc, gypsum, iron ore, lead, zinc, gold, coal, rock salt, gemstones, kaolin, and wild animals. Before 1956, agricultural items were the most traded items in Nigeria, including palm oil and cacao beans. Now, oil is 80% of Nigeria's total revenue, making the government wealthy while corruption keeps the Nigerian people in poverty. Christian missionaries can be seen in Nigeria as early as 1472 when the kings of Portugal launched pioneering mission trips. Bishop J. Crowther is credited with intensely spreading the gospel in the 1840s. Now, 45% of the population is Christian, with Methodists and Baptists more present in the West, Presbyterians and Catholics present in the East, and Scottish Presbyterian and Wesleyan Methodists in the South. Missionaries have made great strides in this region through education and medical aid. Before colonization, different ethnic groups occupied different territories. The slave trade forced many out, and the Sokoto Jihad in 1814 redrew many ethnic boundaries. By 1870, trade was booming, and the British redrew Nigerian boundaries to accommodate their business adventures. In 1954, British protectorates established for trade were renamed as Nigeria. Nigerian independence was granted in 1958, and although the indigenous Africans did not agree with the boundaries, calling them nonsensical, they could not redraw them without threat of war if claims were made on each other's territory.